Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price today wouldn't commit to extending the payments beyond this month.
No decision's been made. I'm not able to comment anymore because it's a court case, and as you know, the defendant in that case is Price. It's House v. Price. And so what I will tell you is that the court has said that the House position was that the previous administration, the administration didn't have any authority to make those payments.
All right, so the second way to undermine Obamacare, get rid of the individual mandate. And this will cause the same chain reaction. Costs would rise with less healthy people in the insurance pool. And when pressed if the administration could sabotage the law or implement it as intended, Price gave mixed signals on that.
Our job is to follow the law of the land, and we take that mission very, very seriously. And so our goal is to put in place, as well as the president's goal, is to put in place a law, a system that actually works for patients. You can't do that under the current structure.
All right, so what will come next? Joining me now, Bloomberg's Sahil Kapoor, the nation's Joan Walsh, David Jolly, former Florida Republican congressman, and Brian Darling, former senior communications director for Rand Paul. Great to have you all with me and a lot to talk about here. But Joan, let's talk about the political calculation that the president will be making if he really decides to throw the insurance markets into chaos.
Well, listening to Tom Price say we're going to enforce the law, enforcing the law as it is would mean paying these cost-sharing payments and also enforcing the individual mandate. One thing they've said that they can do sneakily, Thomas, is just not fine people. Just stop enforcing it. But maybe they can't get rid of it by fiat, but if they don't enforce it, if they don't fine people, then it doesn't. People know that there's no penalty. So this is really dangerous. I think the political calculation is dangerous for them, though. The president has said repeatedly, and some Republicans echo him, that if Obamacare goes into a death spiral, which, trust me, those two moves together probably would do that, that Americans will blame Obama and blame the Democrats. This is absolutely false. The current administration and the Republican Party, which hold both houses of Congress, will be blamed rightly. They cannot pass this back on President Obama, who's been gone for 7 months.
Well, when we think about who holds the power structure in Washington right now, Congress, let me talk about that because the president has these options for trying to undermine Obamacare. Sure. But they've kind of already gone through all the motions on this. I mean, they sued against Medicaid expansion. They limited risk insurance company subsidies. State Republican governors, they refused to create exchanges for this. They halted ACA advertising. Sign-up facilities in 18 cities were closed. The 2018 enrollment period cut in half. So there was this strangulation of the ACA already, and the GOP was labeled obstructionist for Obama. But with Republicans in charge, isn't it their fault now and their failure to govern?
Well, now you've also gotten to where the world is upside down. A Republican president threatening a Republican Congress to hold back subsidies and whether or not to enforce mandates. I mean, this is something where, frankly, Republicans have embraced kind of left-leaning healthcare policy ideas. You know, one of the things we have to watch, though, when the president suggests whether or not he's going to let Obamacare implode, listen, this is the law of the land. That is like suggesting that President Obama had forward-deployed soldiers to Iraq or Afghanistan, and now this president disagrees, so he's going to withhold ammo. At some point, this president becomes an accomplice in those who lose health care as a result of these types of threats. The reality is there has never been a Republican plan. And without Republicans first coming up with a plan and then working with Democrats on a consensus that they can sell to the American people, then we will see nothing out of this more than just more tweets from the president.
And we know one of the biggest hiccups or linchpins for the GOP, Sahil, is the mandate and the individual part of that. As Joan was talking about, they could look the other way on this. But here was Tom Price as he was talking about that very issue earlier. Take a look.
Well, the individual mandate is one of those things that actually is driving up the cost for the American people in terms of coverage. So what we're trying to do is make it so that Obamacare is no longer harming the patients of this land.
All right, so is Price right there? Is the mandate driving up costs, Sahil?
Thomas, what the CBO has said is that the individual mandate has moved some younger and healthier people into the system. And as a result, what has happened is the opposite. It has driven down costs. Now, what is true is that a lot of them, either by virtue of the fact that the penalty is not high enough or for another reason, have chosen to forego the mandate and just pay the fine instead. Obviously, costs have risen for them. So I think, what the Secretary is suggesting is that the administration, he's not tipping his hand as to how the administration will handle this. I'm not sure the President has decided. His authority is limited. There are waivers that the HHS Secretary can hand out for mandates, but these tend to be on a individual case-by-case basis. The President and the Republican Congress are at a real crossroads right now on what to do with health care. They've tried every which way to get something through the House. They succeeded there. They've tried every which way to get something through the Senate. The Senate has rejected repeal. It's rejected repeal and replace, and it's rejected a very stripped-down version of repeal that includes the provisions of the ACA that the Republicans despise most. If they cannot get that through, what can they get through? And if they can't do that, then they have a real gut check moment, because polling finds that by a 2-to-1 margin, the President and the Republicans, by virtue of the fact that they control the White House and Congress, are going to be blamed for future problems in the Affordable Care Act. And at this path that we're on right now, there will be problems, especially if there's continuing uncertainty about these cost-sharing reductions, and insurers and markets don't really know, what the future of this is going to be.
If we just look at the numbers on this, we've got of the 11.5 million marketplace enrollees nationally, 6.3 million live in Republican districts, 5.2 million live in Democratic districts. And we think about what the President is thinking on this. Brian, let me ask you, though, conservative groups are really sending this warning shot to Republicans, saying don't give up on this issue. The President also saying that as well. And conservative groups want to say that these senators that voted no against the skinny repeal are sellouts. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree that they're sellouts. Republicans for 7 years have promised to repeal and replace Obamacare, and they failed to do it. And Democrats unified. Not one Democrat voted for any of these replacement plans. So I don't know how you can't blame Democrats for this failing system we have, which is Obamacare. You can blame them. And I know that everybody's going to want to point to these insurance bailouts, the money that the federal government, the billions that the federal government hands over to insurance companies, and the fact that many Americans are forced to buy insurance, overpriced insurance that they don't want, and the fact that President Trump wants to do something about it. But you know what? Ultimately, this is Obamacare, President Obama's signature law. He is to blame, and the Democrats who obstructed change are to blame too.
So, Sil, as we know about how Republicans are having a struggle to try to fix Obamacare, and with Tom Price saying today, if we can only replace it, then we talk about the different numbers here. What Brian was just referring to, the money that's going to different insurance subsidies. And we had Lindsey Graham in a tweet saying that I agree with President Donald Trump, Obamacare can't be repaired, it's fatally flawed, it must be replaced. But is there really evidence that suggests that it has to be replaced as opposed to updated or amended?
Thomas, it depends on how you define these things. I mean, technically, you can, repeal the entire Affordable Care Act and replace it with everything but one word. So there are a lot of word games that have been played in the politics of this over the last 7 years. There are a number of things. One of the reasons Republicans are having such a hard time uniting around repealing this is that there are provisions in the law that they actually like. A lot of them like the Medicaid expansion. There's senators from states like Susan Collins in Maine and Lisa Murkowski in Alaska that don't want that coverage to go away. People like the pre-existing condition protections, which were not nearly as strong in any of the Republican bills, nearly as robust for consumers and restrictive on insurers as to what they could do. There is now a real divide in the Republican Party about how to move forward. Senator McConnell, shortly after the bill failed, gave a speech on the Senate floor, and he did not sound like a man who plans to bring this a repeal and replace bill up again. He talked about working with Democrats. He invited them to ask, to put forward their ideas, but he put some warning signs out there as to what he is and isn't going to accept. In the House, I spoke to a number of House Freedom Caucus members who are not ready to give up. This is the be-all and end-all of their political, life for them. They came here to repeal this law, and they cannot, envision going forward without it. Whereas you have some other senior House Republicans who say they agree with Senator McCain. It's time to start from a clean sheet of paper, work with Democrats, do this through the regular order, which, by the way, this was pretty much the opposite of the way this bill came forward. No committee hearings, no markups, no, real, I guess, amendments to the actual bill on the floor before it was passed. So, there's a division there. There are a number of Republicans who want to move in a very different direction. And I think that's what we're going to see playing out. And the president is going to have a lot to do with that because he controls the purse strings on these legally ambiguous cost-sharing subsidies. And his HHS can decide whether to continue, to make the case that this law is failing and that, people shouldn't sign up, or to try to make it work.
And we know, Joan, that Jeff Flake and John McCain of Arizona, they asked for this, as Sahil is saying, to go back to regular order.
Right.
Political reporting, this proposal by Senator Graham would send block grants, something the White House is pushing to get 50 votes on, co-sponsored by Bill Cassidy and Dean Heller. I just want to point out, though, Jeff Flake has a new book coming out, Conscience of a Conservative, and he talks about the fact that the Republican Party used to play to a broader audience, one that demanded that we accomplish something, but we've decided that putting party over country is okay. Flake voted yes for the skinny repeal.
Right.
McCain bailed him out by voting no. What
Their
kind of
governor,
message are they sending?
And their Republican governor did not want them to vote on any of this. The message they're sending, it's a very mixed message. I mean, I think Senator McCain did the right thing. I don't see him coming back for something that does not meet the criteria that he set out, that it works with Democrats, that it has hearings. So Senator McCain and Senator Cassidy think they might be stepping into the breach and maybe they'll get something. I don't see John McCain leaving his sickbed to vote for a bill like that. I have to just reply to Brian briefly. Brian, Democrats were not asked to be part of this process, first of all. Second of all, this is an enormously popular program now. It's enormously popular. Why they would participate in repealing it and starting over is ridiculous. There's lots to be fixed about it. And Chuck Schumer has reached out to John McCain and reached out to other people and said, let's get together and fix the exchanges and fix the things that aren't working. But they were not invited into this process. So to blame them for anything that's happened at this point, I think is a little bit unfair.
Well, the Democrats want a single-payer system. Democrats and Chuck Schumer himself has been calling for a massive bailout, an even bigger bailout, and wants to work with Republicans to bail out insurance companies. That's going to be a Band-Aid. It's not going to fix our systemic problems we have with health care that's been caused by Obamacare.
Single payer, I support single payer. I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon. Yeah, thanks for being derisive. But single payer is great because it doesn't bail out the insurance companies. Brian, single
it's
payer
socialism,
is
and it will ruin our system,
sure.
And it will be a government takeover even worse than we have now.
Medicare,
now we have a de facto government takeover of the health.
People love Medicare. Yes, they do. They buy extra plans, but they love it.
Right.
Try taking it away, Brian.
Congressman, do you miss Washington right now?
No. And look, let's clear up a couple things. It's not enormously popular. It did just cross the 50% threshold, so it is more favorable than unfavorable. That is not enormous. Here's the basic problem for both parties right now. There are three constituencies when they look at a health care bill. The first is those who received extended coverage, right? Pre-existing conditions, other mandated coverages. There are those who received financial assistance through Medicaid expansion or subsidies on the exchange. There's the third that were victims of the lie of the year, who saw their plans disrupted and prices go up. The problem is Republicans are only speaking to the third constituency. Democrats are only speaking to the first two. And until the parties realize that, we will not have an enormously popular solution.
Congressman, thank you very much. We're going to leave it right there. David Jolly, Brian Darling, thanks for joining us. Joan, thanks for being here on the set. Sahil Kapoor, great to see you.